So keeping on track with the official stuff, so we just talked about it, what we thought about the official release. What do you guys think about the Prime 4 trailer that came out recently, about a couple of months ago?
Um, I want to go first because I have a bit of a mixed feeling with it. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so I was actually hoping it would have been a Switch 2 um, reveal. I have a strong suspicion that Nintendo is going to release this on the Switch 2, but it could be it could also just be that it's just a Switch port with a Switch 2 port coming down the road. And the reason I want to make this clear is because I think we've kind of seen what Nintendo can do for the Nintendo Switch, or like kind of the benchmark for the Nintendo Switch. And I think one of the best things about releasing a really cool game is releasing it on new hardware and us getting the ability to see like an old franchise like brought to a new level. And this is something that I really hope Nintendo does do. There's no doubt in my mind that the efforts that they're putting towards the Switch 2 Prime 4 will look good, but I can't help but feel that we will probably get a better look of it if it's on the Switch 2, whatever the Switch 2 is. And then one last thing, and then I'll give it to you guys. I think this is dangerously close to Prime 3 as far as like the sequential order of things happening. It very much felt like Samus just landed to in the beginning of Prime
Norion.
3. Yeah, Norion to put up the shields from the Leviathan crashing into the planet. And it almost played the same way with like pirates destroying a door that like the research center GF troopers are hiding behind. And then at the same time, an adversary from an older game comes in and tries to like fight Samus with a form of Silux, whereas in Prime 3 was Ridley. So it just the beats are too similar, and I'm hoping that they deliberately showed us that in that sequential order to subvert our expectations of what the game is, because I'm afraid that if that is what we have to look forward to, it would feel like a Prime 3.5. But I'm sure it's not.
Yeah.
We don't have enough information at this stage. But that's really it. Aside from that, everything else blew me away. Like in terms of graphics, I'm thinking this is going to look better than Luigi's Mansion 3, which I think is currently the best looking game on the Switch.
On the
So
Switch, easily. Yeah.
yeah,
I had the same thoughts pretty much. I felt that the trailer was a bit of a mixed bag because it almost felt like that's like the worst footage from a Metroid Prime game that you could possibly show, is like a super hyper linear cinematic sequence which really doesn't embody the essence of what Metroid Prime actually is. Because what we look forward to Metroid Prime is that solitary isolation and that slow methodical pacing, which is deliberately carved out with some beautiful melodic music playing in the background. And that's what I felt like they should have shown, but maybe they're reserving that for a later, like a launch trailer or something like that, and they don't want to reveal too much, which in that case, fine. The one thing that does give me a little bit of hope is that little 6 to 10 second segment that they showed towards the end with that lush forest area and that wonderful melody that was playing in the background with the choirs and the piano and stuff. I felt like I would have loved to see an extended version of what happens after that moment rather than this intro sequence, which is 100%. This is an intro sequence, like there's no question about it, so I already know how the game starts. But yeah, I would say mixed bag. I would give it a 6 out of 10 if I were to judge the trailer.
I don't know. I think it's funny because I think if we saw this trailer a couple years ago, right, we all would have blown our, it would have blew our minds. Just the graphics alone, just the way it looks, and seeing Prime look that good.
Mm-hmm.
But since then, we've had Dread, right? We've had Prime Remastered. Both are
Yeah.
beautiful games and really good games, solid games. So I think our thirst may have been quenched a little bit, and so we were able to stay tempered when we finally did see it. But it wasn't overwhelming either, by no means. Like the trailer itself wasn't the best edited, best representation, I think, of what they could show us. It's just the very first look. But I don't know, I have reservations for sure. I'm kind of worried, like you mentioned, being maybe a Prime 3.5. That worries me a little bit because as much as they tried to open up Prime 3 and have you be able to go to the different planets and stuff, and it was really cool, but it still felt almost more on rails than ever before. It felt like you were being guided and handholded way more than ever before, especially more than Prime 1 and Echoes. So it's kind of like, that's what's worrying me. Like, is it going to be the super action? Like showing those action sequences too felt very Halo to me. And so, and then, you know, I know a lot of people have talked about the art style being very Halo. Just got to keep in mind that those Halo 4 art developers worked for Retro for a long time. So they kind of took that IP, they kind of merged it with Halo and now brought it back, and it's kind of grown and to its own little thing. I kind of wish the art style was a little bit different, a little bit more unique, but I do like it. At the same time, it looks nice. But I just think those things alone aren't going to be enough anymore. We've had, you know, some really good games, and now that we've all refreshed ourselves with Metroid Prime, and now everyone's played it, and what are the expectations now? They're a little different. So I think we have to wait and see. Like you said, Ray, the last part of the trailer really kind of is when it hit the note, because I've never been a huge fan of the space pirate theme, and so hearing the space pirate theme again right away off the bat kind of was a little bit of putting off to me. So like hearing that last part though, that musical piece at the end, especially, that was like, okay, that's what I'm hoping for. New Prime music like that. and hopefully more gameplay like that in that isolation feel, but we'll see. There's a lot, I'm sure. It's going to be a huge game. That's the one thing I can pretty much guarantee. It's going to be the biggest Prime game, biggest Metroid game period ever.
Absolutely. So what do we think is the current state of the franchise based on what all we've seen so far? Dread, Prime Remastered, and now this Prime 4 trailer. I would say Metroid has never been in this good of a shape since the GameCube era. The GameCube and the Game Boy Advance era. Like the last time we had these many Metroid games was like 20 years ago. And it's really good to see that again. I mean, that I just hope they deliver on Prime 4. I'm really, really hoping that it's more like Prime 1 and 2 than Prime 3, and I want it to be better than all three of them, just because you have better technology with the Switch. They have better AI. They can have better AI and everything. So I'm really hoping that they leverage everything to just make it the best that it can actually be.
I think they also have lots of research, right? Since Metroid had been dormant, many like smaller studios have come to kind of take the new mantle as a Metroid by gathering inspiration from not only what came before, but from other popular games that have like a Metroid-light aspect to it, like the Dark Souls games, just to name one. But when it comes to Metroid and what it's like today, I think that it's never been better. And I think a large part of that is thanks to Dread. I had just spoken to a friend of mine not too long ago, maybe a couple of months ago. And this is a friend that I haven't reached out to in a while, so it's been a substantial amount of time. And I would always gloat about how Metroid Prime used to be like my favorite game of all time. And I would always encourage him to play, but it was never convenient because it was inaccessible, and he had to either dust off the Wii U to play it, or play it on the GameCube, which he also had a copy of. And I don't expect anybody to go backwards into like old hardware and play a classic game when it's just a curiosity. So I come to the end of that year with Dread, we're talking. I'm like, what's your favorite game of the year? He said Metroid Dread, and I couldn't believe that. I was like, really? like of all the games, and I know this person's tastes in games, I really could not believe Dread was his favorite game of the year. And then to my surprise, we talk again when Prime Remastered comes out, and it's his second favorite game of that year. I think it was the same year Hi-Fi Rush, and I think that was his favorite game. But to be the second favorite game of the year, and this is a guy that plays lots of modern video games. Like, he has a huge backlog of games that he does eventually get through. What it tells me is that Metroid is now getting in the hands of everybody. And it's so center stage, and I think a lot of it's thanks to the genre it inspired, the whole Metroidvania thing, and how so many indie developers have gone and made a bunch of those games and have pulled people in through games like Hollow Knight. Even Super Smash Brothers, it's like a big game that collects a whole bunch of people or a whole bunch of IPs from different games. I really have a good feeling about the franchise. I think it's going to accelerate, and especially if they knock it with 4. I think Prime 4 is going to seal the deal, that this is going to be a game that a lot of people, or a series that a lot of people are going to be looking forward to.
I think with that said, my thoughts kind of move more towards where I'd like to see Metroid go in the future versus, because you're right, it is in a very, very good place right now, but it could still get better. And I think Nintendo needs to take advantage of the opportunity they have to be able to push the IP as a whole and push it further and be able to make it one of their bigger earners, and maybe one day get up there with Mario and Zelda. And I think they need to do that in a lot of different ways. I think one could be finally getting that Netflix anime or something along those lines, or a movie. I don't really care to see a live action movie. I really don't. I would prefer it be anime, but if they did do a live action film and it was done right, it could be great. I would love to see that. It could push the IP into more people's hands and get more people familiar with it, and that's going to do better for the games. And I think as far as the games go, I kind of like to see just more games, period. And, however that takes place inside of the universe, maybe it doesn't even have to involve Samus directly every time. I know they tried that with Federation Force, but that game was just a multiplayer, set of mini games. It wasn't really a full-fledged, game. They weren't really putting their best shot there. So I think maybe I'd really like to see one of these games return to the roots of Metroidvania, like really go to the difficult levels, the platforming, everything, bring all that back for one of these games. But to do that, they have to have, I think, more than one thing to offer. I think, like you were saying, Sardines, that's why so many people are saying, Dread's my favorite game. And so it's easy to say, yeah, Dread isn't really a full-fledged Metroidvania in the sense of what it was before. And so those are some of the elements that I think the super core fans still want, and they still put, it in there. It's just not, it's not the same, and it's going to continue, I think, to push more towards the action and maybe not quite as much exploration. So that's fine, because keep bringing in new people and stuff, but I think I'd like to see a game here that's really, really for the core fans. And that might be up to an independent studio to make a Prime like that. I still think that's probably what's gonna have to happen.
I wanted to add to what you're saying. I think this would be an amazing topic to maybe bring in with the community one day, where we can just talk about the state of Metroid and sort of like where the direction of Metroid has been heading, because I do agree that Dread is leaning more on the action side of things and have kind of, I wouldn't say forgotten, but just have pivoted away from like a Super Metroid's kind of game design.
Right.
And that's like one of the Metroid games, if not the Metroid game, that has inspired the entire genre of Metroidvanias. So absolutely. I do think that's a very cool conversation to have with the community at some point.
That was actually one of my gripes with Dread. Now that you mention it, it was actually one of my issues with Dread. Like, fantastic game all around, but the one biggest issue with Dread was the fact that its exploration was incredibly hampered by its handholdiness.
Yeah.
And that game was as handholdy as Fusion, if not more. And sure, there was a sequence break here and there. I think there were like 3 in total sequence breaks,
Right.
or alternative pathways that were very cool. But those were fine. Those were really nice to discover. But there were several moments, despite those being in the game, despite those sequence breaks or alternative paths being in the game, that the game would lock you into a certain direction, and you would constantly hit these points of no returns, which would railroad you down a certain path and not allow you to explore the areas that you just went to earlier until the very end of the game. And that sort of defeats the purpose, I thought, of what a Metroidvania exploration should be, because now that you have your new upgrade, you technically should be able to go back to previous areas and then unlock the things that you haven't yet within that same time span, instead of waiting until the end of the game to do so. And there were several moments of this. There was the fire plant in Artaria. There was the whole that one metallic block in Gamaran. Right. There was the ice freezing over the elevator.
Yeah.
In Artaria when you returned. Each and every one of these were just extremely annoying, I would say. And unlike the Prime games, which is still my favorite, Prime allows you to go back to or return to your ship at any point in the game, regardless of where you are. You could be at a completely different corner of the world, and you can still come back to your ship, to the beginning of the game. Yeah. And I wish Dread did that.
Yeah, I agree. I think Prime is more of the spiritual successor to Super Metroid in that way, in a lot of ways, really, other than it not being in the same perspective. But it's, first person and everything. But as far as the actual game design, level design, the atmosphere, everything, they pulled almost everything from Super Metroid. And I hope that Prime 4 does that and really just doubles down. What are your guys' thoughts on the state of the Metroid community, including our Aether Primus community?